For decades, the story of human evolution has been told as a straight line, one species rising, another fading away, each replacing the last like chapters in a neatly ordered book. It sounded simple, comforting even, a story of progress marching forward. But science has now pulled that tidy tale apart. The deeper we look into our DNA, the more that clean timeline unravels into something far wilder and more intimate. Genetics has overturned everything we thought we knew. Inside every cell of our bodies lies a hidden record of ancient meetings, encounters that defied extinction. Modern humans did not simply appear after Neanderthals or Denisovans vanished. We met them, we lived beside them, and somewhere, in caves and valleys long erased by time, we shared fire, stories, and blood. Our genes carry proof of those unions. The evidence shows that modern humans still hold small fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, and even deeper still, whispers from an older lineage scientists call the super archaics. These forgotten people walked the earth nearly 2 million years ago. Long before our kind or even the Neanderthals existed, they spread across Eurasia and survived for hundreds of thousands of years. When later humans arrived, they didn't find an empty world, they found distant cousins already living there. And instead of pure replacement, there was exchange, connection, and blending. That realization changes everything. Evolution was never a clean ladder climbing upward. It was, and still is, a braided river currents of life diverging, meeting again, flowing together across the vast landscapes of time. Each twist of that river carried not just survival, but attraction, curiosity, and the stubborn human urge to reach out to those who were different yet strangely familiar. So the story you are about to hear is not about extinction. It is about entanglement. It is about how love, chance, and adaptation braided our species together. As one scientist put it, every human alive today carries echoes of forgotten lovers who met 1 million years ago. Within us live traces of their breath, their choices, their resilience. In this journey, we will follow those echoes through time, through DNA strands that act like threads of memory back to the ancient encounters that shaped who we are. You will see that the faces of those long-lost ancestors have vanished, but their legacy remains written in our blood. Welcome to the true story of us. Long before Neanderthals or Denisovans walked the cold valleys of Ice Age Europe, there was another kind of human older, tougher, and far more mysterious. Scientists call them the super archaics, a lineage that split from the rest of the human family almost 2 million years ago, between 1.9 and 2.2 million years to be exact. That moment in deep time matches the first great human migration out of Africa, when early Homo erectus began spreading across the vast and unfamiliar lands of Eurasia. These were not our ancestors in a direct, straight line. They were more like distant pioneers, explorers, who left the warmth of Africa to claim a world no human had ever seen. Over countless generations, they adapted to strange climates and endless horizons, carving out an existence from the edges of survival. In the shifting continents of that age, they built the first human footprints across Asia and Europe. In a sense, they were the true founders of humanity's global story. Genetic evidence suggests that their populations were surprisingly large, somewhere between 20 and 50,000 individuals. That number might not sound like much today, but in a prehistoric world with scarce food and predators everywhere, it was enormous. It hints at a people spread wide across continents, forming eastern and western branches that evolved subtle differences over hundreds of thousands of years. Some groups may have lived along the fertile valleys of Central Asia, others near the dense forests of what is now Southeast Asia. This structure, these clusters of people separated by distance yet connected by shared ancestry, would later shape how they encountered and mingled with the species that followed. Recent genetic studies from 2024 have deepened the mystery even further. They suggest that the super archaics were not isolated relics of the past. Instead, they were part of a complex web of contact, mixing genes with newer human lineages again and again. These weren't single, rare events. They were repeated encounters stretching over hundreds of millennia. Imagine waves of migration moving back and forth across ancient Eurasia, each wave meeting remnants of the last. In places like Southwest Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and the high plateaus near Tibet, these worlds overlapped. There, on the frontier between climates and species, the threads of human history intertwined. If we could step back and see their lives, we would find no grand cities or written words, only survival. They hunted in small groups, used simple stone tools, and gathered around flickering fires to share warmth against the cold winds of the ancient steppes. Their children learned by watching, their tools shaped by instinct and necessity. Nights would have been long and quiet, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant call of wild animals. Picture them as tiny silhouettes against the glow of a campfire, surrounded by endless darkness and forest. The continents were still wild then, their paths uncertain, yet these people endured. And though their bones have mostly vanished, their presence never truly disappeared. They became the silent foundation of all who came later, the first inhabitants of Eurasia, the ones who greeted each new wave of humans that ventured outward. Their legacy waited in the soil, in the fossils, and ultimately in the DNA of those who would meet them again hundreds of thousands of years later. Around 700,000 years ago, a new wave of humans began to spread across Eurasia. They were the ancestors of both Neanderthals and Denisovans, a group scientists sometimes call the Neanderovans. These people were strong, intelligent, and highly adaptive, shaped by countless generations of struggle in the wild lands that stretched from Europe to East Asia. When they migrated northward and eastward, they expected to find an empty continent waiting for them. But the world they entered was far from empty. Across mountains, forests, and open plains, they encountered others, the descendants of the super-archaics, those ancient pioneers who had been there for over 1 million years. The meeting of these two human worlds must have been extraordinary. The newcomers carrying new skills and ideas, the old inhabitants shaped by deep survival in these lands. There may have been fear, curiosity, or conflict, but also recognition. They saw in each other something both alien and familiar, echoes of a shared ancestry stretching back to the dawn of humankind. Genetic evidence tells us that this was not just a passing contact. The two groups interbred. Traces of that union still survive in the DNA of later species. Roughly 1 to 3% of the Neanderthal and Denisovan genome came from those ancient super-archaic people. In biological terms, that's astonishing. Two populations separated for more than 1 million years, long enough that most animals would be incapable of producing fertile offspring, somehow found compatibility. It means that the boundaries between these early humans were far softer than we once imagined. The story of human evolution is not a chain of isolated species, but a continuum of connection. And it didn't happen just once. New studies using a genetic mapping tool called ARGweaver-D have uncovered signals of multiple interbreeding events between Denisovans and super-archaics occurring as recently as 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. These were not accidents. They were part of an ongoing pattern of contact spread across time and geography, from Central Asia to the Indian subcontinent, from the Tibetan plateau to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. The human story was being rewritten again and again through these encounters. Imagine those moments. In a cold valley where mammoths roamed, a band of Neanderovans followed the smoke of another camp and found faces they had never seen. Their skulls were shaped differently, their speech rougher, but they shared the same needs: the warmth of fire, the hunger for meat, the rhythm of survival. Maybe at first they kept their distance, watching each other across a river or a plain. Then curiosity overcame fear. Tools were traded, food was shared, and eventually families were formed. A handful of unions was enough to blend their genes, leaving a mark that still lingers in us today. We can see this legacy in modern people. Populations in Papua New Guinea and Australia still carry Denisovan DNA, and within that DNA lie faint signals from the super-archaics themselves, tiny threads of inheritance stretching back nearly 2 million years. Each of us holds pieces of this vast mosaic, a testament to the fact that human beings have always been drawn to connection. While most animals drift apart genetically until they can no longer reproduce, humans kept crossing those invisible lines. That is what makes our lineage so unusual. It wasn't just survival of the fittest, it was survival through connection, through curiosity, through union. In the end, these encounters remind us of a profound truth. We were never separate species, only distant cousins meeting again. Every crossing of paths, every exchange of blood and culture blurred the lines between us and them. And through that blurring, something remarkable was born: the endlessly mixed, endlessly resilient story of humanity itself. When we look in the mirror, we see ourselves as modern creatures of the present, shaped by civilization, technology, and time. But within each of us lies something far older. Hidden inside every cell are fragments of stories written long before language, before firelight gatherings, before Homo sapiens even existed. Our DNA carries whispers from the deep past, passed down through generations like a secret message that never fades. Modern genetic research reveals that all living humans outside of Africa still carry between 2 and 5% of Neanderthal DNA. Some populations in Asia and Oceania also hold traces of Denisovan ancestry. These small fragments, just a few strands among billions, are the fingerprints of encounters that happened tens or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. But here's where the story bends even deeper. Some of those Denisovan genes came from super archaics, meaning that a portion of what lives inside us today comes from beings that walked the earth nearly 2 million years ago. It is hard to comprehend that kind of timescale. But imagine this. When a Denisovan and a super archaic human met somewhere in ancient Asia, they shared more than a fleeting moment. They shared DNA that would travel through countless generations, eventually finding its way into you. That is what scientists now call genetic time travel. The idea that genes can leap across the ages, surviving the rise and fall of species, carrying with them the lessons of endurance. These ancient fragments are not just biological relics. Many of them still shape the way we live and survive today. For example, people of Papua New Guinea and Australia have Denisovan genes that strengthen their immune systems and help them adapt to tropical climates. In the thin air of the Himalayas, Tibetan people carry a variant of a Denisovan gene that regulates how their bodies use oxygen, a gift from an ancient ancestor that lets them thrive where others struggle to breathe. Other studies, conducted between 2020 and 2024, have traced archaic origins in genes linked to skin pigmentation, oxygen metabolism, and immune response. These genes are like tiny survival manuals written by our distant relatives, lessons coded in DNA rather than words. They tell us that adaptation wasn't a single heroic act by modern humans alone, but the cumulative wisdom of countless lineages that faced hardship and refused to vanish. Using new technologies like argv-D, scientists can now identify these fragments buried deep within our genomes, tiny stretches of DNA so ancient they predate even Neanderthals. Each piece is a molecular fossil, a living echo of an ancestor whose bones may never be found. In some of these genetic threads, researchers have even detected patterns suggesting that super archaic DNA passed first to Denisovans, then from Denisovans into modern humans, a chain of inheritance spanning more than 1 million years. It is the biological equivalent of a relay race run across epochs, each species carrying the torch forward before passing it on. And so, when you breathe, when your skin reacts to sunlight, when your body fights off infection, you may be drawing upon the strength of ancient cousins who learned those skills under entirely different skies. Their genes live on not as museum artifacts, but as active participants in your life. In a profound sense, we don't just carry DNA from our ancestors, we carry their survival, their instincts, their memory. That is the real gift of evolution's tangled web. Every adaptation, every fragment of borrowed DNA is a reminder that humanity was never built in isolation. We are the sum of all who came before millions of years of resilience braided together. Across time and geography, from Ice Age Europe to tropical Asia, from vanished species to modern cities, those connections remain alive in our blood. When we speak of human progress, we are really speaking of a chain that began in firelight and continues now in the hum of our genes. The story of the super archaics, the Neanderthals, and the Denisovans is not a tale of extinction, it's a story of inheritance. And through that inheritance, we discover something humbling. The past is not behind us, it's within us. If we were to walk through the ruins of time, we might still find traces of those who came before, the ones whose faces are lost, but whose echoes remain in us. Scattered across Asia are fragments of bone and skull that whisper of the super-archaics. In China, there is the famous Peking man, who once stood upright nearly 1 million years ago. Nearby lie the Dali skull and the Hexian fossils, each showing a mix of ancient and modern traits, like unfinished sketches of humanity. On the high plateaus of Tibet, a single jawbone, massive and weathered, speaks of a being adapted to thin air long before the first humans arrived. And far to the south, on the island of Java, fossils of Homo erectus still rest in volcanic soil, reminders of a people who lived for nearly 2 million years and perhaps formed part of that mysterious super-archaic network. We can almost imagine what they looked like, short and strong, with broad faces and heavy brows, bodies built to endure the cold and the hunt. Their eyes might have reflected the same firelight that flickers in ours. They were not monsters or missing links, they were humans in their own way. They used tools, controlled fire, and survived through intelligence and cooperation. And though their voices have faded, the songs of their existence still hum quietly in our DNA. Scientists still debate exactly who these fossils belong to. Were they the super-archaics themselves, or descendants of even older lineages? Perhaps they represent ghost populations, groups that vanished physically, but left behind fragments of their genomes hidden inside us. Geneticists now believe that there were multiple ghost lineages, branches of the human family tree that disappeared without a trace of bone, yet live on as invisible signatures within our cells. The more we study, the more the clean lines of human evolution blur into a living tapestry. That is why we can no longer think of evolution as a tidy branching tree. It is better seen as a braided river, where currents diverge, rejoin, and carry parts of each other downstream. Each of us is a meeting point of those currents, a living confluence of histories, instincts, and ancient desires. The blood that runs through us is not pure or singular. It is the product of encounters, of curiosity, of survival, intertwined with love. We are all hybrids, not just of species, but of stories, of memories written in DNA. When you breathe, when you dream, when you look at the stars and wonder who you are, remember that your body is a museum of time. Inside you flows the strength of Neanderthals, the resilience of Denisovans, and the endurance of those unnamed super-archaics who once braved a world without maps. So if you ever feel small beneath the vast sky, remember this: within you lives the entire history of humankind. You are the voice of every ancestor who refused to disappear. Their legacy beats in your pulse, glimmers in your eyes, and carries forward in every heartbeat. Thank you for joining this journey through time. If this story moved you, share it, because the more we understand where we come from, the more we understand who we truly are. Like, subscribe, and continue exploring the deep roots of humanity, because our story, the story written in our genes, is far from over.